This is SelfWork, and I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. At SelfWork, we discuss psychological and emotional issues and what you can do about them, whether that's learning self-acceptance, taking action, or seeking therapy or treatment. 10 years ago, I extended the walls of my practice to reach those of you who might already be knowledgeable about mental health treatment, but also to those of you who might say you'd never darken the door of a therapist. And yet, you are here. I'll answer your questions while I invite you to take a few minutes for your own self-work.
A lot of my work with anxious high achievers is about honoring and identifying those incredible capacities like hard work, discipline, analytical problem solving, and at the same time learning that those aren't always the best solutions. And if you're struggling with chronic anxiety, it's often because you're overusing those and underusing other strategies and approaches.
Welcome to this week's edition of SelfWork. My interview today with Dr. Nick Wignall is something I am so excited to bring you. Here are a few words from Nick. Historically, the field of psychology and emotional health has been dominated by an insight model, which implies that if we only understand ourselves better, we will feel better. To my mind, this is hopelessly naive. And SelfWork listeners know that this is my stance as well. Insight is helpful and can illuminate what needs to happen. But knowing what you can do about something, that's what leads to hope. So Dr. Nick is going to talk to us about emotional fitness, where individuals can build their emotional muscle through consistent practice. And he also talks about becoming the hero of your own story. That's intriguing. So I know you'll find this episode really helpful. But first, let's hear from BetterHelp. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's the beginning of the academic year when worn out but proud parents are making sure that their child or children has what they need to make the new year successful, or at least start out on the right foot. It's also a time when you might have a little more free time, since so much of the summer you've been social director, chef, entertainment provider, disciplinarian, and bedtime tucker-inner. So what could be a fantastic way for you to start off your new year? BetterHelp could be the right answer. BetterHelp can match you up with a licensed clinician, who can offer you a confidential space and relationship in which to work on something that's been troubling to you, or a depression that you haven't been able to beat, or an anxiety that only seems to be growing. It's the #1 online therapy provider that makes reaching out about as easy as it can get. Within 48 hours, you'll have again a professional licensed therapist whom you can text, email, or talk with to guide you. And you're not having to comb through therapist websites or drive to appointments. It's convenient, inexpensive, and readily available. You can find a therapist that fits your needs with BetterHelp. And if you use the code or link at betterhelp.com/selfwork, you'll get 10% off your first month of sessions. Just do it. You'll be glad you did. That link again is betterhelp.com/selfwork to get 10% off your first month of services. And now, Dr. Nick Wignall. So today we have Dr. Nick Wignall, and I'm so pleased that he's here. I've been on his podcast before, and he and I share our training at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. So we're practically twins, right, Nick?
In every way.
So tell SelfWork a little bit about you.
Sure. Like you mentioned, I am a psychologist. I trained as a psychologist, and then I worked for about 7 years in a private practice, doing mostly work with folks who struggled with anxiety and insomnia. Those were my two specialties. And so I really cut my teeth there. And while I was doing that, I started getting really interested in writing and teaching and podcasting to sort of a general public, taking the things I was learning about in the therapy office and just writing about them in a more accessible way. And so I got really into that, and I started teaching and doing workshops and courses and all that kind of stuff. And then more recently, the last few years, I've branched out, and a partner and I started a leadership consulting company. So we go and work with teams and organizations, and we do a lot of work on communication, conflict, team dynamics, stuff like that. So that's been really fun and kind of a new chapter in the work I've been doing. So that's kind of what I'm up to these days. And I'm actually in the middle of writing my first book. And so
Great. I'll
that's
have you
been quite the
back.
adventure as well. Yeah.
What's it on? Is it on which of all those topics is it on?
So it's on kind of all of them in a way, but the overarching theme is the idea of agency. I found that in my work, it's this kind of container that holds together a lot of the work that I do across anxiety, trouble with communication and relationships, difficulties with resilience, emotional resilience, and agency is a kind of a container for all those topics. When you a common ingredient in working through all of those is developing a sense of agency, a sense that I am not just a participant in my life, in my story, but I'm the hero of my story and the author. And that comes with a lot of power and potential, but a lot of responsibility as well. And so cultivating a mindset for agency is, I'm sure you know, is a really, depending on the language you use, it's a common theme through almost any kind of self-work, really, to get to our topic for today.
So why do you think people struggle with that concept and with that choice to move into the sense of I have agency?
Oh, so many things. Like all these questions, it's it's complicated. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. Everything from a lack of models. You know, if you don't have good models for things early on in life, it's hard to have a template to kind of follow through in your life, and it feels very uncomfortable and difficult for you if you don't have good models for that sort of thing. Right. You might even have counter models, people who told you or taught you implicitly or explicitly that it's bad if you kind of go out on your own or sort of take responsibility for your own life and lead your life according to your own lights. You know, that can be very countercultural in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah.
It's
Instead,
also
they want you to follow the rules or belief system,
follow the path,
like church or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure. And agency isn't necessarily, it's not always about, I'm going to, forget the path. I'm going to go off into the woods. It's about being conscientious and thoughtful about it. Am I going to stay on the path? And if I'm going to, I'm doing it for the right reasons, for reasons that align with my values and who I am as a person and what really matters to me. So it's not necessarily staying on the path versus blazing your own trail, although that can be part of it, but it's just being intentional in that choice, realizing there is a choice there and being intentional about it one way or another. So anyway, there's lots of other factors that go into it, including one, which we may end up talking about more, which is fear. I think if you think about any of your favorite stories growing up as a kid, whether that's Nancy Drew or The Hobbit or Harry Potter or Moana or whatever it is, the story always starts with the hero who doesn't feel especially like a hero. They're kind of insecure. They're an orphan. They don't seem to have a lot of potential, right? Yeah. But what they do, what makes them a hero, it's not that they're the smartest or the strongest or even the most charismatic person in the story. What makes them a hero is that they decide to go off on an adventure to pursue something important to them, even though they don't feel ready, even though they feel anxious,
you ever
even
feel
though
ready?
They feel insecure. I don't know. Maybe there's some people who do, but that is kind of core to this idea of agency and being the hero of our own life. It's about being willing to kind of hold the fear, to honor the fear. This is tough. This is uncertain. And to do what's important anyway, despite the fear.
I love that you're saying that. Here at SelfWork, what I have really tried to stress with the understanding and recognition that some problems are very complicated or complex, and there's not a simple thing you can do to quote unquote fix them. But what the little mantra I often say is, what can you do about it? Now, that doesn't mean that you can change it, but what's the little piece of something that you could focus on, that you could move in a certain direction that feels good to you? And again, it might be infinitesimal, but it's movement. And it's agency.
Yeah. I think there's often a false choice in the world of mental health, which is you either think about things in terms of all these awful things that have happened to you and that are happening to you, and you feel kind of powerless against the real kind of power and influence of a lot of structural things in your life that are working against you. Or it's this, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and kind of get her done and do what you need to do. And who cares what's going on in your life? That shouldn't matter. And that's really a false choice. And that I think what a lot of us in this work need to be better at doing and communicating to the people we work with is that you can acknowledge that things are very hard and that there are real reasons why things are scary or a struggle or what have you. And at the same time, almost always the most helpful thing to do is to focus on what's within that circle of things I can actually control and influence right now. And to spend 95% of my time and energy in that circle, not kind of looking out at all these kind of factors that are making it hard, but to really keep our focus on what are the things I can actually do? What are the things right in front of me? What are the levers and knobs and buttons I can press and adjust, again, that are under my control that can help me at least start to move forward in little ways. Otherwise, it gets awfully discouraging.
Yeah. And you brought up a term, anxious high achiever. Are those people who struggle more with that, struggle less with that? Tell me about.
Yeah, so the anxious high achiever is this phrase I've kind of developed over the course of my work in therapy, but then especially in my coaching practice. I have a small coaching practice right now. And it's this type of person that I've ended up working with a lot, partly because I probably fit that mold. So you end up kind of working with people who are similar than you in a lot of ways, which is an interesting phenomenon.
No, not at all.
No. But the anxious high achiever is someone who, on the one hand, is very high achieving. They're goal oriented, they're ambitious, they're strivers, optimizers. But they're also very thoughtful and conscientious. They're very self-aware. They're attuned to how other people are feeling and thinking. And these people, there's a lot of great things that go along with these two sets of characteristics, right? Being ambitious and high achieving, but also conscientious and thoughtful. And the core thing is they tend to be really good problem solvers. They're really good at using thinking, especially analytical thinking, to solve problems and to work their way through problems. This is why most of them were very good students. They got lots of, kind of reward and praise for doing well in school and then in their jobs. And so a lot of their identity comes from using their brains, their big, powerful brains, to solve problems. Right? But there's this problem where it's called, there's a saying you may have heard of called, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a version of what's called Maslow's hammer. So if you go back to the psychologist named Maslow, and he came up with this or popularized this idea that often when we are really good at using a tool, any kind of tool, we tend to overuse it.
Oh, yeah.
Often to the exclusion of other better tools. So this kind of anxious high achiever, a defining characteristic is we try to think our way out of every problem. Often to the exclusion of action, of experimenting, trying new things, just messing around. Because historically, we don't do that. We follow the rules and we're really good at it. You give us the rules and we will work super hard and use our analytical abilities to solve the problems. But as we progress in life, often the problems we start confronting are much more open-ended and ambiguous. They don't have definite playbooks and solutions. Right? Should I get married or not? No one's going to give you the answer. There is no answer out there you can find. Right? You have to struggle through it. You have to, and ultimately, you got to pull the trigger. You got to try something. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. So the anxious part of the anxious high achiever is that when you over rely on this intellectual problem solving to solve all your problems, you end up kind of running hot. You end up getting kind of anxious because your relationship with uncertainty, because it becomes increasingly fraught. You use intellectualizing to avoid or get around uncertainty instead of learning to sit with the uncertainty and act and experiment and explore. And so a lot of my work with anxious high achievers is about honoring and identifying those incredible capacities like hard work, discipline, analytical problem solving, and at the same time, learning that those aren't always the best solutions. And if you're struggling with chronic anxiety, it's often because you're overusing those and underusing other strategies and approaches.
That's fascinating. So, I've never thought of it.
That's the idea with the anxious high achiever.
So let's take a break and we'll be back in just a moment. And is that what you mean by emotional fear learning? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So emotional fear learning is it's pretty common in the world of mental health and psychology and therapy these days. There's this term called experiential avoidance, which is popularized by the acceptance commitment therapy people. And the idea with experiential avoidance is that when you get in the habit of running away from difficult experiences inside you, it might be a physical sensation, but often it's an emotional one: fear, anger, grief. any kind of uncomfortable, difficult emotion, when you chronically treat it like a threat by either fighting it or fleeing it, so trying to solve it or trying to run away from it, in both cases, your brain learns, oh, that thing is a threat. It's dangerous. Because if you're fighting or fleeing something, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system, and you're teaching your brain, categorize this thing as dangerous, which isn't surprising. If your brain sees you either running away from or getting in a fight with something, it's going to assume pretty naturally, okay, that thing's dangerous. So if you're feeling anxious, like let's say you're sitting in a meeting and you have an idea and you want to share it, but then you start worrying, like, oh, maybe it's a dumb idea. Maybe people won't like it. They'll think I'm stupid, whatever. So when you decide, oh, you know what, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
What you're doing there is you're withholding your idea, and this is key, in order to avoid the feeling of anxiety. Because if you shared that idea, you would have to sit with the uncertainty and the anxiety that someone might think it's stupid.
Sure.
Right? So you're sacrificing sharing your good idea in order to avoid the feeling of anxiety. Now, the tricky part is, in the moment, it works. You feel better. You get out of that anxiety. You take yourself
off the hook, so to speak.
Exactly. So it's reinforcing. The avoidance gets reinforced because in the very short term, it's relieving. It feels good. The problem, though, is what have I taught my brain? And what you've taught your brain in that situation is that anxiety is bad. It's a threat. So the next time you feel anxious, that next meeting you show up in, right, where you want to share an idea, you're going to get anxious, but then, and this is key, you're going to get anxious about being anxious.
Oh God, yes.
This is compound anxiety. Yeah. When you compound emotions, if you have 10 units of anxiety and then you get anxious about another 10 units of anxiety, they're not additive. They don't equal 20 units. They equal like 100 units of anxiety. When you compound emotions, they get exponentially bigger. So, and this happens when you run away from or try to get rid of emotions like anxiety. In the long run, you just make them more intense and you have a harder and harder time dealing with them. So you get more and more insecure, less and less confident, and worst of all, you do more and more sacrificing of the things that are really important to you. Your creativity, your values, your goals, your aspirations. You put all those aside because you get kind of addicted in a way to avoiding uncertainty and anxiety.
Yeah.
So that's emotional fear learning. You're teaching your brain to be afraid of your own emotions. And while you get temporary relief, you sacrifice so much in the long run by doing this. So a lot of work, and I'm sure you know this, Margaret, a lot of our work as therapists and coaches is in some way teaching people to develop a different relationship with difficult emotions. Instead of treating them like enemies to be gotten rid of or avoided, right? We need to rethink that relationship. And no matter how uncomfortable they are, right, start acting and treating them in a different way.
Yeah, the phrase I've used with clients is you just have to sit with it. You just have to sit with it and let it be. It's kind of I remember one time I'd been invited to a psych hospital to actually experience some of the things that their clients or patients did. And I did a sweat lodge kind of thing. Boy, that was tough. But it was
a little uncomfortable.
I was sitting with my uncertainty and my fear and everything else. It was an incredible experience, by the way. So,
I think often when you say that, sit with it, that was one of those things when I first started doing this work, I would hear that and I would go, okay, that makes sense. But like, what is that exactly? Like, what do I do when I sit? What does that mean mechanically to actually sit with something? What am I supposed to do? And I think it's a good question. And I think there's a couple ways that I like to answer that because I want people to have a sense of what it actually means. On a high level, I think the bigger like existential point here is that the fact that our immediate thought is, if I'm uncomfortable, I need to do something about it, is itself an assumption we ought to question. That in the face of difficult emotions, something needs to be done about them. That in itself is problematic and often leads people to doing things like running away or numbing out or intellectualizing or trying to get rid of emotions that, like, as we talked about, makes them even worse in the long run. So I think on a high level, I would really encourage people to reflect a little on they're basic assumptions around what does it mean to experience a difficult emotion? And do I actually have to do something about it? What would happen if I didn't do anything about it?
Right, exactly.
Now, so that's, I think, philosophically, that's good to meditate on. But really pragmatically, there's a couple things, a little process that I often use that maybe is helpful for folks with that one, which is I think it'd be really important just to name or acknowledge how you're feeling. It sounds really dumb and simple,
No,
but the simple power of labeling and differentiating, hey, you know what? I'm feeling really anxious and maybe a little angry right now. Or I'm feeling really nervous and sad right now. There's a whole body of research, it's called affective labeling, that shows the better you are at naming and differentiating how you feel, the easier it is to navigate them well. So it's easier to work through them.
So that is also, go ahead.
No, keep going.
No, that's also a way of decreasing the anxiety about it, right?
Yeah. So in the intensity of the emotion also tends to go down when you label and acknowledge them. But it's counterintuitive because our instinct is run away or get rid of. Instead, by approaching the anxiety, like you would approach a person and say, hey, I'm Nick. What's your name? Right? Like, hey, anxiety, like, I see you here. I'm acknowledging you. So I think it's there's a lot you can do, but a really simple thing you can do when you think, okay, I know I'm supposed to sit with this emotion, but what does it actually mean? Well, one thing is just label it, just acknowledge it. And one last little thought on that is the key is you don't want to intellectualize though. Intellectualize means instead of labeling it with plain emotional words like mad, angry, sad, scared, guilty, ashamed, those are all actual emotions. We instead do things like we use concepts like I'm stressed right now, or metaphors like I'm bugged, or I'm really bugged right now, or I'm feeling kind of down. These are all metaphors that there's not necessarily anything wrong with these terms, but a lot of times we get in the habit of using them as avoidance mechanisms because, and this is funny to think about, using plain emotional language is often more uncomfortable in the moment than using abstractions. So if you come home from work and you had a really tough day at work and your partner says, oh, how are you doing today? And it's hard if you go out and say like, I'm really sad. When was the last time you heard an adult say, I'm really sad?
Yeah.
It almost never happens. Kids are great about that. They use plain emotion words all the time, but adults almost never do it. Instead, we say things like, oh, I'm really tired, or I'm kind of upset, or we use these abstractions, these generic intellectualizations. So a challenge is when you start labeling your emotions, the little mantra I use is say it like a 6-year-old. How would a 6-year-old kid describe how I'm feeling right now? Would they say I'm feeling really down? No, they'd say I'm sad. Right? Would they say I'm feeling overwhelmed? No, probably not. They'd probably say I'm feeling mad and scared right now.
Yeah.
So try to break it down to these basic emotional units because, and this is the key, like the mechanism of why this is helpful. When you do that, you're teaching your brain, you're moving toward the emotion, which teaches your brain safety.
Right.
When you approach your emotions, it teaches the opposite lesson. Emotional fear learning comes from running away or trying to get rid of your emotions. That's where you become increasingly afraid and, insecure in the face of emotions.
Such a great point.
You can teach your brain to know that emotions are safe and therefore feel more confident in the face of difficult emotions like anxiety or grief or shame if you approach them. And a great way to do that is to say it like a 6-year-old, label how you feel with plain emotional words. So I think that, just to give people some like kind of tactical, like what do I actually do with that, sit with something. I think that's one way. There's tons of ways to do this, but that's one really, I think, pretty practical thing anyone can do to get a little better at that idea of sitting with difficult emotions.
Well, you also said there's sort of 3 underrated cures for anxiety, which, and it fits in exactly with what you're talking about, willingness, assertiveness, and agency, because all of those things are about being in the moment the way it really is and acknowledging that. And so like, a certain kind of, do you think that's assertiveness? Do you think that's, or it's certainly willingness to travel some untraveled pathway but, just say I'm sad instead of I'm overwhelmed. So how do you think those are underrated?
I think first of all, very few people talk about these things because we sometimes we get a little obsessed with the emotion itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it is good to be aware of and to acknowledge our emotions, right? But you don't want to be avoidant of your emotions, right? That has a whole host of problems associated with it. But you can fall into another trap on the other end of the spectrum where you get kind of obsessed with and lost in your emotions.
Oh yeah.
You dwell on them and you ruminate on them, you stew on them, and you just get kind of like sucked into them.
Engrossed in them.
Yeah, engrossed. That's a great word, right? And so I think appropriate emotional processing actually tries to walk the balance between those extremes. You're neither avoidant or obsessive with your emotions. Instead, you acknowledge them and you listen to them. But ultimately, and this is what kind of undergirds willingness, assertiveness, and agency. In any situation, though, you make decisions not based on the emotion, but based on your values, what actually matters to you. So you listen to and you honor your emotions, but you don't let them push you around. Just because your anger says, oh, say something sarcastic, doesn't mean you should do that. Or just because your fear or anxiety says, oh no, keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, doesn't mean that's what you should actually do. You should acknowledge those feelings, but ultimately you want your values to guide your behavior and your choices. So
of course, all that happens in a split second.
Oh, it's so hard. It's crazy hard.
Yeah.
But even though it's hard, you can get better at it. It takes practice and it takes patience, but you can get much faster and more intuitive about quickly acknowledging how you're feeling and then identifying, okay, what do I actually want in this situation? What's meaningful or really matters to me? And how can I move toward that instead of just reacting to however I feel? And so willingness, assertiveness, and agency, what all of those have in common is they involve, and this is, again, the acceptance and commitment therapy people are all over this. It's in the name, which is that you want to accept or tolerate how you're feeling, but you want to move toward your commitments, your values, your aspirations, your goals, right? So all of these, being willing to have an emotion and to keep going with what matters to you despite the emotion. It's not, oh, I have to address feeling anxious before I can give the talk. No, nobody does that. Professional speakers don't do that. No way, right? You will never give a talk if you have to get rid of the anxiety before you can give a talk, right? You give the talk being willing to be a little bit anxious while you give the talk, right? Assertiveness is just another version of this. Assertiveness is in our relationships, in our communication, you are willing to say, you're willing to ask for what you really want, to say no to what you don't want, to express how you really feel, even though someone might get upset, someone might be disappointed in you. It's really scary, whatever. You are willing to communicate and engage in relationships according to your values, not according to how people may feel and how you might feel about other people feeling X and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then agency, again, it's the same thing. Like the story of your life is in front of you. Are you going to kind of pick that up and take responsibility for it, like the hero of a story? Or are you going to continue to sort of live in the shadows of someone else's story, to perpetually be, the sidekick, the bridesmaid, never the bride, like whatever kind of metaphor you want to use. But agency is about being willing to like pick up authorship over your own life, even though it's scary, even though you don't feel ready, even though there's uncertainty, even though you feel like an imposter. It's your life, right? And so again, all of those involve that common denominator of having a relationship with your emotions that is where you are aware of them and you're respectful of them, but you don't take orders from them either.
Yeah, and they're not the truth all the time either. I mean, that's how you feel. Yeah, right.
I think one way to think about it is your emotions are always well-intentioned, but they're not always correct. They're like a good friend.
Yeah.
If they're a good friend and they give you advice, they're always trying to help. They have your best interest at heart. But just because someone's trying to help doesn't mean they're always going to give you perfectly good advice.
Exactly.
So I think you want to treat your emotions like that, like a good friend. They always have your best interest at heart. They're not your enemy. They're not out to get you or sabotage you. But you shouldn't just do whatever they say either. You want to acknowledge them, validate them, but then you also want to think about your values and what actually matters to you.
Oh boy, so many questions come to mind because I think I've had people stumble and not really be able to answer their own question of what are my values. I mean, it's an incredible question to ask yourself, to actually sit down and begin to write out or think out, what do I, what if someone said something about me that, Nick really values blank. What is that? And how do you want to create that in your life and live it?
Yeah, I think, an interesting place to start with that is just looking at really, forget values, just start with something really basic like preferences. Like, what do you, like in a core way, just to yourself, how do you really enjoy spending your time? I think even that is a really helpful question. And this is actually the hard part of that question, if you subtract out all of the expectations about how I should be spending my time, all of the worries about what other people will think if I'm not spending my time doing X, Y, and Z, right? How I feel like spending my time versus what I want to be doing with my time. Often very different things, right? So even just like one question, like how do I actually enjoy spending my time? What leads me to feeling really, what fills my tank? If you really sit down and just meditate on that one question, I think that will really point you toward some of your really core values.
Great.
Another one I really like
advice.
while we're on values is often we understand ourselves better through other people than we do through ourselves. Like there's definitely utility in like sitting in a room and meditating and journaling or reflecting on yourself, your own inner experience, and introspecting. But a lot of times we can see ourselves, or at least parts of ourselves, especially our values, more clearly through other people. And a way to get that at this is to think through, who are the people in my life, people I know, who I really admire. Now, it doesn't mean you admire everything about them, but there's at least something about them that you really admire, right? Take 5 minutes and just make a list, just brainstorm a list of people in your life you really admire. It could be a family member, it could be a coworker, it could be that really cheerful barista at Starbucks every morning, like whatever it is. And then ask yourself, like, okay, what traits do they have that are kind of underlying that admiration? So the barista at Starbucks, cheerful, friendly, or kind of positive, like whatever. And you go through and you do that for a few of these people, and then look at these traits, and those traits that you really admire in others, though I guarantee it, those are pointing toward values in you. The reason we admire those other people is because they show us what really matters to us, our values.
Yeah. Wow, there's
a funny way where you can
suggestion.
You can come to your values circularly through what you admire in other people.
That sounds like homework for me. That sounds great. When Nick and I talked a couple of weeks ago, I was so fascinated by what he had to say, and I thought he spoke so eloquently that I actually divided that conversation into 2 different episodes because I didn't want to cut out anything that he had to say. So next week, we'll also hear from Dr. Wignall, but this time about insomnia. I can't believe in 10 years of doing self-work, we have never covered insomnia. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. You can go to my website at drmargaretrutherford.com and subscribe there, and you'll get a weekly newsletter that now is going to include a tip from me. Usually this is going to be something that I've been reminded of through my current work with clients, and so it's hot off the grill, but gives you something a little different from the newsletter. And of course, you'll still get the podcast and my article for the week. Thank you for being here. I know you have a choice, and I'm so glad you chose SelfWork. Please take care of yourself, your family, and your loved ones, and your community. I'm Dr. Margaret, and this has been SelfWork.